When 13 sit down to dine, the first to rise is the first to die. Some people refuse to travel today. They postpone flights, delay plans, stay exactly where they are. Some won't make important decisions. They wait, they hesitate. They tell themselves tomorrow will be safer. Some won't even sit down to dinner if there are 13 at the table. Friday the 13th isn't just a date, it's a feeling, a tightening in the chest, a second thought you didn't plan to have. Friday the 13th has followed us for centuries, not because it holds power on its own, but because we gave it power. Layer by layer, story by story, event by event. Tonight we look at the fear behind the date, the history that shaped it, and the legends that reinforce it, and the moments that taught us to be uneasy. This is MyCrimany. The fear has a name. The fear of Friday the 13th isn't imaginary. It's recognized in psychology. Triskaidekaphobia, the fear of the number 13. Paraskavidotrobia, the fear of Friday the 13th itself. These fears aren't just superstition, they're about pattern making. Humans are wired to search for meaning, especially after something bad happens. When coincidence repeats, the brain starts paying attention, and when it repeats on the same date, the date begins to feel dangerous. 13 at the table. One of the earliest Western links between 13 and death come from the Last Supper. 13 people sat at the table, sharing food, sharing wine, sharing what appeared to be an ordinary evening. One of them, Judas, would betray Jesus. Following day was Good Friday. Over time, theology turned it into warning, and warning turned into superstition. 13 stopped being just a number, it became something people avoided, a fear quietly passing down, sometimes as a belief, sometimes as a rhyme. When 13 sit down to dine, the first to rise is the first to die. The 13 Club. In the late 1800s, a group of skeptics tried to prove superstition wrong. They called themselves the 13 Club. They met on the 13th day of each month, sat at 13 tables, walked under ladders on purpose, spilled salt, broke mirrors. Their goal was simple, to prove none of it mattered, and nothing catastrophic happened. But discomfort remained, because fear doesn't always disappear when challenged. Sometimes it just learns how to wait. The number 13 and the moon. Long before it was feared, 13 was tied to the moon. There are roughly 13 lunar cycles in a year, cycles tied to timekeeping, to the body, to intuition. In some cultures, this made 13 sacred. In others, particularly patriarchal societies, anything tied to cycles, intuition, or the moon became suspect. Over time, 13 shifted from balance to something unsettling. The legend of the HMS Friday, one of the most persistent Friday the 13th stories, comes from naval lore. According to legend, the ship was commissioned to disprove superstition. It was built on a Friday, launched on a Friday, and was sent to sea on Friday the 13th. The ship was never seen again. There is no historical record proving it existed, but the story survives. Not because it's true, but because it feels like something that could be. Friday, October 13th, 1307. One Friday the 13th does stand firmly in history. October 13th, 1307. Before dawn, orders were issued across France. Arrests were carried out simultaneously. The Knights Templar were accused of heresy, tortured into confessions. Many were executed. An entire order dismantled in a single day. Power, betrayal, death. The date was remembered. Friday the 13th isn't cursed. It's remembered. It's remembered because fear reinforces memory, because coincidence becomes pattern, and because stories, when repeated long enough, begin to feel like truth. When 13 sits down to dine, the first to rise is the first to die. Maybe it was never meant as a prediction. Maybe it was meant as a warning about what happens when fear is invited to the table and allowed to stay. Good night.